And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Matthew 16:19. This declaration is often misunderstood to mean that Peter was given the right to rule and to make laws for the church. In some translations, this passage can almost sound as if Jesus was saying that whatever Peter decided to bind on earth will become bound in heaven, and whatever Peter decided to loose on earth will become loosed in heaven. Now, let's look at this text closely. We know from Matthew 18:18 that it wasn't just Peter the one who received the promise, but the rest of the apostles as well. Remember that to all of them, Jesus also made the promise that in their regeneration, which is a reference to the Christian age, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, which happened after his ascension to heaven. Notice, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Matthew 19:28. This is a reference to the authority given to the apostles to make a judgment on different matters based on the law of Christ. It was to all of the apostles that the promise was made, not only to Peter. But what does this mean? First of all, the binding and loosing refers to the forgiveness of sin by the proclamation of the divine means of pardon. Beginning with the day of Pentecost in Acts 2, there were some who obeyed the divinely established terms of pardon and entrance into the church that Christ established. The sins of these people were forgiven or loosed, and they were added into the church. Those who did not obey the terms given by Peter, their sins remained or continued to be bound. This helps explain why Jesus said to his apostles after his resurrection, "If you forgive the sins of any, their sins have been forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they have been retained." John 20:23. It is not the apostles who make the decisions of whose sins are forgiven or whose sins are retained. It was their privilege and responsibility to declare the terms by which forgiveness of sins and entrance into the church can be attained. An apostle could judge that a person was forgiven based on their following their heavenly guidelines given by them through inspiration. An apostle carried an inspired message that was being proclaimed for the first time, but that came directly from heaven, not from themselves. If we take a closer look at the phrase in question, we can see this more clearly. The words bound and loosed are in the perfect tense. The perfect tense is a special Greek tense which is not as common as the other Greek tenses in the New Testament. For this reason, the use of the perfect tense usually reflects a deliberate choice on the part of the writer or speaker. When a writer or speaker wanted to emphasize the results or present state of a past action, or when they just wanted to emphasize the completion of an action, they used the perfect tense. In English, a Greek word in the perfect tense can be translated using the English perfect or present tenses. For example, the verb gegraptai in Matthew 4:4 is in the perfect tense. Depending on the emphasis, it can be translated as "it has been written" or just as "it is written." Both translations are technically correct, but the context indicates that "it is written" is the most accurate translation. In the same way, the demonym can be translated as "it has been bound" if we're focusing on the completed action in the past, or "it is bound" if we're focusing on the present state. Likewise, lelumenum can be translated as "it has been loosed" or it is loosed. Now, let's not forget that Jesus is saying that these actions will happen in the future. So if we move these translations to the future, the possible translations are will have been bound, or just will be bound, and will have been loosed, or simply will be loosed. So what is the perfect tense telling us then? First of all, it is telling us that by the time the apostles would be binding and loosing, whatever they would be binding and loosing would already have been bound in heaven. This binding and loosing in heaven has nothing to do with the apostles. Someone else would have initiated the binding and loosing in heaven by the time we get to Acts 2, but not the apostles. The only one who would have done this is Jesus, for he said, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you." Matthew 28:18 through 20. Jesus also promised his apostles, "The Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all things that I have said to you." John 14:26. The apostles were the inspired spokesmen of Christ, but the message came from heaven, not from the earth. For this reason, Paul wrote about the apostles, "We are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you, on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God." 2 Corinthians 5:20. Any conclusion, therefore, that puts Peter above any of the apostles or over the whole church is not found in this text nor in the rest of the New Testament. This was a promise saying that the apostles were going to be inspired by the Holy Spirit to know and teach the truth, not that they had authority to give their own private rules for the church. All Peter did was to publish the laws of admission to the kingdom which Jesus had commanded and the Holy Spirit had confirmed.